Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 5, Episode 26. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we'll take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Haven't done an episode exclusively on sporting events in a while, and therefore I'm doing an episode exclusively on sporting events. The Suns trade Kevin Durant, and frankly get as much as I think a team could in that type of trade. Once again, I was wrong. I had a segment on Kyler Murray and the peculiarities that existed in his contract. It turns out that was simply the NFL owners colluding again to prevent any more fully guaranteed contracts. Who knew? And the New York Metropolitans decide to lose a number of baseball games in a row. Thank you to my loyal listeners. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, you like it commercial free, please consider supporting.
Act 1. The Suns trade Kevin Durant.
I held off on starting a podcast for so long because I felt like the landscape of sports talk was so stupid and there was such this collective idiocy that I didn't want to be a part of it, even if it was to try to go against the grain. Now that I have this platform, that I took this leap, one of the reasons why I like continuing to do the podcast, even though it is an extreme chore, it's more and more of a burden every year. You see things happen in sports, politics, social issues, religion, right? Just like the tagline. And the takes are so stupid that you think to yourself, is there any sane voice out there that's going to try to analyze why something happened, why certain decisions were made versus others? The Kevin Durant situation is a great example of this. I've seen way too many takes living in the city of Phoenix about the trade, and many of them follow along the line of the Suns didn't get enough to trade a player of the caliber of Kevin Durant. These people are fucking idiots. It's as if being in that sports landscape and never having had a real job, particularly where you had to negotiate in any meaningful way, they don't know how it works. Well, Phoenix gave up so much to get Durant, and he's one of the top players who's ever played the position. He's a top 10 scorer in the history of the league. Who gives a shit about all of this? This isn't a fantasy team. Kevin Durant is old. In NBA years, Kevin Durant is old. Kevin Durant is also oft injured. If you're going to pay someone $122 million for a 2 or 3 year deal, you want him on the floor for 82 games. But more than those two other things, Kevin Durant, in every destination that he's ever landed at, has proven, it has been demonstrated, he is not a leader of men. He is going to put the ball in the basket, and he's going to do it as well as probably anybody else in the league while he's in the league, and that's it. He's not going to be any kind of presence in the locker room. He's not going to lead the team at all. In fact, if he does anything, it's going to be to express displeasure at something or someone. How many teams want that in the 21st century? Why did Dallas trade Luka Doncic, an iconic, a generational player? They asked him over and over again, lose some weight. Stop eating and drinking so much during the course of the season. Stop eating and drinking so much, particularly in the off season. He wouldn't do it. They realized they had a guy who was going to do whatever he wanted to do because he had those amazing games, not only in the regular season, but in the playoffs. Did they think that that was going to amount to a championship? No, they didn't. Were they right? I believe they were. So they said, instead of giving this guy $40 or $50 million a year as he gets older, to then be more and more defiant and to have to deal with more and more injuries, let's trade him now. What did everyone say about that trade? The Mavericks got fleeced. He was worth way more than that. I believe there's a disassociation between how general managers and owners see the league and see players versus how the fans and the pundits, they see players. The league is becoming more pragmatic. These GMs, these owners are becoming savvier. They don't look at these players as inputs into some fantasy league. And that's exactly why the Suns traded for Kevin Durant. They had a newer owner who wanted to make a big splash and thought that he could win big and win quickly with certain iconic players. And it blew up in his face. And now the Suns are having to do what teams that try to win that way do, and that's rebuild. Sell off assets, acquire as many picks as you can, hopefully draft wisely, and then actually develop the players that you draft. Oklahoma City wins the NBA championship. How did Oklahoma City acquire so many of the picks that they used on these young, and by the way, under contract for a while, players that are on that basketball team? They traded this iconic superstar of a basketball player. What was his name? Oh, it was Kevin Durant. Yes, they traded Paul George, but for the sake of this piece, a trade about Kevin Durant, isn't it funny that this team that has gone out and won the NBA championship began a rebuild by trading Kevin Durant for high round draft picks, which they used wisely, and they turned around and they developed those picks into the talent that is on that team today. If you're an NBA GM, why do you want Kevin Durant on your basketball team? He's older. He's more prone to injury. You know that he's not going to be anything but a mere presence in your locker room. He's literally just going to exist within the locker room. To the extent that he opens his mouth or does anything, it's probably going to be more negative than positive. And he's not a great defender. He's going to be a liability on defense. That limits the number of suitors that are actually willing to go out and trade for Kevin Durant. I think he landed in the only place that he could land and immediately be successful, and that's Houston. So the Suns were limited in how many trade partners they had and how much leverage they could exercise to get a better deal from someone like Houston or another team that was interested. Why does Kevin Durant fit so well in Houston? Houston is young. They already play defense very well, and they had a huge problem throughout the course of the season and particularly in the playoffs, scoring in crunch time in the half-court offense. Durant can come in and immediately alleviate a couple of those problems. He's going to be able to score in the half-court offense, and it doesn't matter what part of the game it is. He's got ice water in his veins. Give him the basketball. If it's 6 minutes left in the third, or if it's 16 seconds left in the fourth, the man can score the basketball. Are there any dark clouds looming over these rays of sunshine? Of course. The team is relatively young, and Kevin Durant is not a leader. Is he in a position in his career where if some of the younger guys step up to be the leader in the locker room, is he going to at least abide by that leadership? I'm not saying that he's going to encourage or support. Will he at least abide by it? Will at least keep his mouth shut? If a younger player who's stepping into his own is trying to become a leader of the locker room, and you have a veteran who has been a journeyman, really, for the last 5 or 6 seasons of his career, and he subtly, or maybe not so subtly, undermines this person's leadership, how is that going to affect the locker room? I'm recording this on Thursday, June 26th. So the draft started on Wednesday, June 25th. The Phoenix Suns have been movers and shakers in that draft. I'm not going to expand this piece to talk about any of the things they did, the people that they drafted. They're clearly working on their front court. I think they're looking at a team like Oklahoma City and realizing they have to be able to compete in the front court in the modern NBA. And that means having a transition between bigs that can actually play below or near the basket, maybe not like they did in the 90s or the early aughts, but you've got to have some size with a higher level of skill than they've got on the roster now. I believe Phoenix did as well as they could under the circumstances with 2 players that they're trying to get off of their roster, Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. Everybody knows that Phoenix is trying to trade those 2, and everyone knows that they don't have a lot of suitors willing to take on those types of players with those types of contracts. So anyone that is thinking about trading for them, they've got the leverage. I'll end the piece by saying I don't have any personal animosity against Kevin Durant. He was an amazing presence on the floor while he was a Phoenix Sun. It was fun to go to those games and watch him. But unfortunately, because of the way the team was constructed and the fact that, again, he isn't really a vocal leader of men, He wasn't the leader on the floor. He scored 34 points. He scored 44 points. He may have had 12 rebounds. He may have had 5 or 6 assists. And Phoenix lost. And that was when he was on the floor, which, if you know anything about Kevin Durant's career over the course of at least the last 3 seasons, the 2 that he was in Phoenix, he wasn't on the floor all the time. The Phoenix Suns overpaid to get Kevin Durant. He probably wasn't worth what they paid to get him here, and he certainly wasn't a player the caliber of which you could get that kind of haul 2 or 3 years after a trade like that was made, particularly with the injuries he suffered and particularly given his personality. In the aftermath, let's see what the Phoenix Suns can do, because this is going to be a test of their current front office. They've got picks. They've got young players. Let's see how this team grows over the course of the next 2 seasons. Could it be something like Oklahoma City, or is it going to be more of what we experienced under Sarver, the old owner? Talent comes through Phoenix. Talent gets burnt out and wasted. Talent goes somewhere else to become the talent that everyone thought that they could be and win a championship.
Act 2. Once again, I was wrong. The NFL collusion case.
This NFL story isn't getting the kind of press that I think it should, but it actually corresponds well to a piece that I did about the Kyler Murray contract with all of its peculiarities. The NFL went to arbitration over a collusion claim where it was alleged that this NFL management team, I believe it's called the NFL Management Council. It's kind of like the McKinsey Group for the National Football League. It's one of those consulting groups in the mold of like an Arthur Andersen that advises major corporations on how they can be more efficient or they can be more profitable, but in reality are just companies that come in and sign off on a bunch of maybe over the line type stuff, but sometimes illegal stuff that will achieve the same goals. But you had someone make a recommendation, review what you were going to do, and sign off on it. So if 2 or 3 people think it's a good idea, I mean, how could it be illegal? That's what the NFL Management Council does. It makes recommendations. And one of the recommendations that it made after one of the dumbest contracts in the history of all professional sports, when the Cleveland Browns signed Deshaun Watson, and not just sign him to a fully guaranteed contract, this NFL Management Council leapt into action and made these recommendations to the owners, basically saying, look, you can't do this. Of course, it's your choice what you want to do, but you are setting a very bad precedent in the market that's not only going to affect the quarterback position, but that could affect other positions if you continue to sign quarterbacks with fully guaranteed contracts. In light of that, let's harken back to the piece that I did on Kyler Murray and the contract that he signed, where there were all these peculiar incentives in the contract. If Kyler Murray does X, he'll get this amount of money. If he does Y, he'll get this amount of money. At the time, I speculated that the only reason why an NFL team would incent a player in this way is because the player isn't doing those things. And this team is saying, okay, we want you to study more film. We want you to be the first guy into the facility and the last guy to leave. Here's an easy way to incent you to do it. Money. Made sense to me. I'm sure when I did the piece, I had to go to a chiropractor for 2 or 3 weeks because I had torn my rotator cuff patting myself on the back. It seemed so logical. And yet it turns out that in this collusion case, what happened was these owners started talking amongst themselves, and when they got this recommendation from the NFL Management Council, they were stupid enough to go back to some of the principals on the council and talk about ways that they could avoid having to sign these contracts for guaranteed money and what kind of, you guessed it, dear listener, incentives they could add into the contract to keep the contract from being fully guaranteed. And Bidwell, who owns the Cardinals, was one of the most vocal and put into writing all of the ways that he was going to avoid having to pay Kyler Murray so much guaranteed money. And then it comes out that they've put all these, again, peculiar incentives in the contract. It had nothing to do with the fact that Kyler Murray was not a studious quarterback, was not dedicated to his craft. They didn't want to pay guaranteed money, and they thought, Bidwell thought, that he was being clever and abiding by this recommendation from the NFL Management Council. We can put monetary incentives all over this contract to get him closer to the kind of guaranteed money that he's looking for without having to give him guaranteed money. You may be thinking that with this type of evidence, it was clear to the arbitrator that the NFL owners were colluding so that they did not have to pay another fully guaranteed contract, and they could depress the market so that not only the quarterback position, but all of the other positions would only have partially guaranteed contracts. Of course not. We don't live in that kind of society anymore. Courts have become more and more conservative on what they will qualify as bribery or collusion. I mean, you look at some of these cases with these politicians that have been accused of bribery, and you literally have to have a principal come to a politician with a big bag that has a fucking dollar sign on it, and that principal has to say, this is a bag full of money, and then open the bag up and present the bag full of money to the politician. And then the person, this principal, has to say, I want you to accept this money in order to vote a certain way, which you would not vote unless you took this bag of money. And then the politician has to recite to him, yes, I'm going to take this bag of money and vote a certain way, a way that I wouldn't vote otherwise, but for having taken this big bag of money. If you don't have that kind of express conversation between the two, it's not bribery. And here we have a decision from an arbitrator that basically says, yeah, it looks like the NFL Management Council made this recommendation and all 32 owners abided by it. But here's the problem. I can't know the true intent of each one of, and particularly collectively, these NFL owners. So I don't know that they just didn't all independently decide that they weren't going to pay any more fully guaranteed contracts to any quarterback, even though now it explains clearly why you had such weird terms and clauses in Kyler Murray's contract extension, and in particular, Lamar Jackson for Baltimore, why you didn't see, after that tense negotiation period between he and Baltimore, any other team come in and seduce him away from Baltimore. No other team wanted to bid for his services because they knew that a bidding war would end up meaning what? More guaranteed money. And after this recommendation from the NFL Management Council, no one else wanted to incent a system that would require a bidding war leading to more guaranteed money for a quarterback. So in this quarterback-starved league, when you had one of those quarterbacks, probably a top 5 quarterback in the league, on the open market, no one bids up his services because they're afraid of what that will do in setting the market for years to come. But that's not collusion. So once again, I was wrong. There was a perfect explanation as to why Kyler Murray had so many weird clauses in his contract, and there was a perfect explanation as to why Lamar Jackson, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, went into what you could call, for all intents and purposes, a free agency period and only had one team really bidding on his service. It boils down to what it always has. The NFL owners are colluding, and once again, the NFL owners make fools of the NFL Players Association. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Act 3. The New York Metropolitans stop winning.
The Mets had a 3-game series at home against the Tampa Bay Rays. It was, I believe, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series, and they were in each one of those games to a point. They scored some runs, but they ended up losing all 3. I wasn't particularly concerned. I thought it was kind of peculiar that the pitching staff that had been so steady up and until that point in the season, they basically fell apart in those games. They just couldn't stop the Rays from scoring. The Mets go on the road to Atlanta, and they get swept in Atlanta, and they don't look nearly as competitive on the road as they do when they're at home against the Rays in New York. This begins a skid where I believe the Mets were at one point 1-9 in their last 10 baseball games. Now, they've won a couple here and there. I think they just won the series against Atlanta that they had at home, taking 2 out of 3 games. But the Mets have some serious problems in the bottom of their batting order, and it's so strange how 1 or 2 players can make such a difference in a lineup for a baseball team. You wouldn't think as much, but Mark Vientos getting hurt at third base, he's not the greatest third baseman, and he wasn't necessarily on fire at the plate, but I thought that the Mets could suffer through him being absent from the lineup well enough to at least go a little above 500. But without Vientos in the lineup, the bottom half of that order has gone completely ice cold. Couple that with the fact that the Mets pitching staff, that was at one point the best staff in Major League Baseball, 2 things. 1, they're not staying healthy. And unfortunately, that's mostly the starters, which 2, forces you to go into your bullpen earlier than you would like. And now the Mets are doing what they did last year, and they're putting a ton of pressure on their bullpen. Frankly, I don't have a lot to say about it, except for the Mets aren't that good right now. And now I can relate to some of these other teams, particularly Atlanta, when Acuna went out of their lineup. And so many of the Braves fans were like, oh, wait till we get Acuna back. And sometimes when you hear that, you just question, is one guy going to make or break your lineup? Hell yeah, one guy in baseball can make or break your lineup. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.